Just in time to hit peak February sweeps month, the producers brought in none other than Robert James Ewing for a guest shot in this episode. Bobby, of course, hasn't been seen since he helped Gary and Val move into Seaview Circle, but after last week's emotional outpour from Val, Bobby's sense of cockeyed optimism might just be what the California Ewings need.
I don't want to die.
Then don't.
Or, maybe not.
California love.
We open with an exhausted Dr. Harper receiving a file marked for Valene Ewing. He calls Val and tells her that she and Gary should come talk with him immediately. Karen, of course, noses in. Val explains that she just had a growth removed, so it's probably no big deal. Just did a little follow-up. Val, it's sweeps month, come on. Gary also thinks it's probably nothing, but then Gary keeps his rearview mirror trained to the passenger side, so what does he know? Speaking of malignant growths, Kenny Ward spies a couple in the park and comes down with an instant case of baby fever. Ginger has a cure for that, though. She doesn't trust him. Dr. Harper confirms that Val's colon growth is malignant. Gary is mopey about it, and the entire block is freaked out about the idea of Val getting a colostomy. Val tries to keep a brave face in spite of Gary breaking down. Gary, of course, knows the heartbreak of cancer from his mother's mastectomy.
I'm deformed.
I'm assuming because he wasn't really in any of those episodes. I'm sure he heard about it, though. Karen and Diana have a heart-to-heart about death. Sid assures Karen that he'd still love her even if she did have a colostomy bag. See, I think Sid is the guy who Bobby Ewing thinks he is. He's a moral character without Bobby's moralizing.
I'd hate anything that hurt you.
Yeah, we're gonna have to kill him off or something. That kind of goodness it's just too boring. Although he might be thinking of how he could call up that pretty mechanic and get her back. So Sid could have a dark side too. Richard tells Laura that he knew about Val's cancer from Ginger, so it sounds like the word is also metastasizing. Richard starts to act like Richard and then immediately shifts and says he feels guilty for thinking God it wasn't Laura who had cancer. Richard Avery sharing his feelings and opening up to his wife? What the hell is this? Did Lucy Ewing leap into his body to put right what once went wrong? Gary races home from the hospital and nearly plows into Eric Fairgate with the car. Sid freaking karate kicks the doors in and finds Gary sobbing into the phone to Miss Ellie. We get a really good Ted Shackleford scene with him lamenting how much Val invested into him and he just keeps running away, cheating on her, drinking, and generally letting her down. And now he can't even help her. Sid tells him he has to treat grief like alcohol and take it one step at a time. Hey, if you ever get puzzled or salty when you hear the term toxic masculinity and you're wondering what an example of positive masculinity is, it's Sid freaking Fairgate. He kicks down the door, sees Gary is in pain, acknowledges that pain, and reminds Gary that he has the strength to get through this. If only he were a better driver. Val is prepping emotionally for the surgery, so the women of the sack come to see her. Hey, speaking of pains in Val's ass, Abby tells her that the interns sure are cute. She also gushes about how strong Gary is. Kenny surprises Ginger by volunteering to be her Lamaze partner, but she ain't having it. He just really doesn't seem to be getting it. Well, as long as they don't do a rushed about face where Ginger takes him back suddenly, showing that his creepy persistence pays off. You get where this is going. Ginger sees how much of a team effort the process is, and she rushes to find Kenny and take him back. And who should show up to comfort Val in her darkest hour but Bobby Ewing?
You got the touch.
She tells him she's scared of dying, so in perfect Bobby Ewing fashion, he tells her not to.
I don't want to die.
Then don't.
Bobby Ewing, Silver-tongued Senate candidate. Bobby does give Gary some sage advice, though. Just talk to your wife and stop making this about you. He doesn't say the second thing, but it's modeled in Bobby Ewing's behavior because he never turns Pam's problems into his own. Gary is fully supportive after that, and Val calms down a bit. And in the opposite of how Sid Fairgate was handling things, we get Bobby lecturing Gary on having a breakdown and not handling his wife having a malignant tumor in the proper fashion. Bobby is letting some Jock Ewing leak out here as he implies Gary is just too weak to be a supportive husband. He encourages Gary to suppress what he's feeling and get a dick. Bobby also finishes the burial by saying Miss Ellie sent him because she was too ashamed of Gary for not having any courage. Hey dude, we can't all find an exact replica of our disfigured wife to live out our Jimmy Stewart fantasies with. Where's Sid to jump kick this yutz's teeth down his throat? You can kick an out-of-state senatorial candidate in California. I looked that shit up. It's one of those 1800s laws they forgot to take off the books. Oh hey, Sid and Bobby wind up in the same scene. Kick him, Sid. Kick him! Bobby admits that he screwed up his pep talk by trying the tough love thing, and I like that Sid doesn't let him off the hook. He just gives him a look like, yeah, I can see how that would make things worse. Sid goes to clean up Bobby's mess and finds Gary in the nearest bar. Gary is just drowning his sorrows in ginger ale, though. Gary tells Sid that he broke down because he's just not ready for Val to die. He doesn't think he can live without her. And he says this to Sid because Sid listens instead of delivering a sermon. Bob. Of course, everything goes swimmingly, and Val doesn't have to have the colostomy. We find out this in an interesting use of point of view shot, which is usually reserved for slasher movies. It actually does work to heighten the suspense and disorientation, though. It's just one of those weird film language things where no one uses it for that anymore, so it's like a word that has come to mean something totally different now than how it was previously used. Val wakes up and tells Gary it was all a piece of cake. And we're out. It's hard to get that worked up over Val's growth, given that there wasn't much of a build to it. Miss Ellie at least got an arc for her cancer storyline. What this does do, though, is give Ted Shackleford and Joan Van Ark permission to go all out in their performances for the episode. Van Ark is given considerably less to do, but the scene where Karen ducks her head back into the room to tell Val she loves her, because it might be the last time she gets to say it, is devastating.
I love you.
Shackleford gets to chew on the scenery a lot more, and he takes full advantage, showing Gary melting down completely. And what's more, they put his feelings on the page instead of letting the audience just guess as to what he's thinking. Is it worry about Val? Yes. Is it anxiety over whether it'll change how he sees her? Yes. Is it guilt over cheating on her twice in the last year? Of course. Is it the shit million times he ran out on her during a bender? Yeah. People are sometimes bundles of emotions and contradictions, and guilt about feeling worried, and worry over how obvious their guilt is, and worry over how others are judging their ability to handle it, and guilt over worrying about what others think. Just a bunch of worry and guilt and worry. Which can't be the greatest thing if you're an alcoholic. All of this is exacerbated by Bobby Ewing, the anti-Sid, who blusters in to save the day and then promptly steps on his own dick in the process.
He was a little shaky about all this, so I had the brilliant idea that I could shock him back to his senses.
I know that it often seems like I'm too harsh on Bobby when JR is right there doing literally the worst shit imaginable. But the text also treats JR like a villain most days. The difference is Bobby is supposed to be the good brother, and we're supposed to listen to his moral philosophy when he talks. So yeah, I don't think I'm harsh enough on Bobby. And here it's kind of vague as to whether we're supposed to think that it worked. Gary does say that he wants Valene to live immediately after talking to Bobby, and it seems like maybe we're supposed to think that Bobby gave him the idea by telling him some hard truths. But honestly, it just seems like Gary didn't want to think about the possibility that Val wouldn't make it. Bobby's simplistic nonsense is borderline childish. He practically says, "You march right back into that room and you tell that cancer, no, leave me alone, cancer."
I don't want to die.
Then don't.
I'll tell you how not to break. The same way I told Valene how not to die. Don't. You just don't.
I'm all for tough love when it's, love. But this was more from the, "You're a piece of shit for having complex feelings about your wife's cancer, Gary" playbook, which Gary doesn't really deserve. He just tore up his bedroom. He didn't drive her to the rooftop like some husbands. All that being said, this seems to be the season of women forgiving and reconciling with their shitty husbands. Kenny cheated and got kicked out before Ginger took him back. Gary cheated and cheated again, but Val can't live without him. Richard Avery cheated and his six-figure making wife still dotes on him. It's like the writers listened to Tammy Wynette on repeat and didn't know what else to write. And that's a problem they'll continue to try to iron out for the rest of the season.
'Cause I've been living life